Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your January 2024 astrological forecast. For the record, I am recording this from Goa, India. I'm sitting outside my little hut here where I've taught a 10-day retreat, initiation to astrology, that I will be doing again next year in late November, details to follow. But I just want to let you know that there are people that will be walking by that I may acknowledge, or that I may even have to stop to say I'm recording, just so that you know this is the most private place I could find, and yet there's no place that's completely private, so you may hear some voices in the background and so on. I will do the best that I can with what I have. I will be focusing on January of 2024, although I may mention a couple of things about the year in general, and I will be doing a 2024 more detailed forecast that will come out first for my $3 a month patrons, and that's at patreon.com/Rick Levine. And for the others, I will eventually post that probably more toward the end of January for everyone else. One thing I do want to mention, and that is that the second weekend in February at the Los Angeles LAX Hilton, I will be there for the Conscious Life Expo. Go to consciouslifeexpo.com and find out more information about that. And other than that, we're going to jump into the month ahead. And with no further ado, here we go. So, first of all, an overview for the month is that January kicks off a new year that I think is going to prove to be quite an exciting year, a year that will very quickly break from the past. In some ways, and I've been speaking about this for months now, to some extent, the combination of all the retrograde planets in September, October, November, even into December, the planets have begun to turn direct, but they're not moving very fast yet. And at the end of December, we have Chiron and Jupiter both having turned direct now. And at the end of January, we will have Uranus, the last of the outer planets, to turn direct on January 26th, so that by the beginning of February, all the planets are moving direct. And I think that we're going to feel that forward movement, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to get away from the stagnant feeling that there's been a lot of noise, there's been a lot of events, but there's been very little forward progress on a fundamental level. Now, one of the important things is that Mercury has been retrograde for most of the month of December, and on January 1st, Mercury actually stations direct. It'll take a few days for it to pick up speed. But again, we're starting the new year with some kind of contained energy. On January 1st, we have, obviously, like we do every year, the sun is in Capricorn, but we have Venus making an exact square with Saturn, which may subdue the energy a bit on New Year's Eve and on New Year's Day. But the fact that Mercury is stationed, there's a feeling like things are going to change. There's a feeling in the air that regardless of how cataclysmically, overwhelmingly complicated and destructive these times seem on many levels, there's a feeling that things are going to change, and I think that they actually are. It may take another month or so for us to get any really forward motion, as I said before, but with Mercury's direct turn on January 1st, we're going to get an inkling of that energy. So another thing is that the year begins with the moon in Virgo, and that moon in Virgo is just past a trine to the sun. So we have some practicality, and that combined with the Venus square to Saturn, Venus, the planet of attraction and desire, is in Sagittarius, and Venus remains in Sagittarius until the middle of the month. Venus moves into Capricorn around the 23rd, actually on the 23rd. And until then, even though the energy is Capricornian, meaning there's a sense of structure. This is about New Year's resolutions and all of that kind of stuff. The fact is, though, that we have Venus and Mercury and Mars all in Sagittarius at the beginning of the year, and each of them throughout the month will move from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Like I said earlier, Venus moves into Capricorn on the 23rd of January. Mercury, which turns direct on the 1st, moves into Capricorn on the 13th of January. And Mars moves into Capricorn on January 4th. Now, this energy from moving from optimistic, big-seeing, adventurous Sagittarius, which is where the month begins, although, as I said earlier, there's some restraint. The fact is that as these planets move into Capricorn, we're going to feel a bit more stabilization, which on one hand feels good because things stabilize. On the other hand, they also may feel a bit stagnant because we want to be moving forward faster, and yet we're at lockstep into a larger rhythm. The energy of Capricorn as these planets move one at a time. Again, Mars first on January 4th, and then Mercury on the 13th, and then Venus on the 23rd. These are all energies that are in some ways going to give us a serious overtone. This is not a lightweight month. In fact, unlike many other New Year's months, the January of each year, there is this sense of potential, but it's not being realized yet, and it may actually feel a bit overwhelming, like we're still stuck in the past. Now, the first important event of 2024, aside from the exact square between Venus and Saturn on the 1st and the Mercury station, both of which are holding energy patterns the way they are and preventing us from being too optimistic, too much, too fast. Then on the 4th, we have Mars, which is the first outer planet change. Mars we say outer planet, the first real planet outside of the moon. Mars moves from Sagittarius, where for the previous month, there's been this sense of, again, the hope, the aspiration. And when Mars moves into Capricorn on January 4th, it's a bit of a mixed blessing. Traditionally, Mars likes being in Capricorn because Mars finishes what it starts. And this is a very important concept about Mars being exalted or kind of really humming its own stuff in Capricorn, because it's able to not only start things that Mars does well, but finish what it starts. And in fact, Mars throughout the month, Mars will move closer and closer to its conjunction, to its alignment with the Sun, and that becomes an important piece of the month, with Mars and the Sun both moving through Capricorn. We'll get back to that more in just a minute. So here on the chart of January 4th, we can see not only that Mars has moved into Capricorn, but we can also see the Sun moving closer and closer to its square to Chiron, that is exact on the 6th. Let me move this ahead to the 6th, and we see that on the 6th, the Sun making a square to Chiron is significant because we're struggling here with those things that have ailed us in the past. Chiron often reflects wounds of the past, and it reflects our desire and our ability to heal things in the present moment. But it's almost like our desire to methodically heal things and the awareness of how things are so difficult in the present moment. The two of these energies are not getting along well, and that square is exacerbated even more by the looming square of Mercury, still moving through Sagittarius, moving closer and closer to its square to Neptune, and that square is exact on January 8th. And the reason why there's interaction between these two events that I think is significant is that Mercury squared to Neptune makes it difficult for us to see things as they really are. Somehow words are misleading rather than teaching us the truth. Now, granted, Mercury, Neptune together can be imaginative and fantastic. It can be inspirational. It can be spiritual. But often it leaves reality behind a bit. And so there's the sense that we can't quite trust what people are telling us. Maybe we never should trust what people are telling us. But it also means that our words can be misunderstood. And this is all important because as we move to the 9th and the sun makes a half square to Saturn, there's a difficulty that comes in from how we either over-exaggerated or how we imagine things or how we misinterpreted someone's words or how someone misinterpreted our words. But the other thing on the 9th is that the sun moves into an exact trine with Uranus, which is the planet of rebellion, of unconventionality. Uranus is the wild card. Uranus is the outside of the box. It's spontaneous, it's electric, and as the sun makes that trine to Uranus on January 9th, and we may be feeling this for a day or two before and even a day after, that trine is kind of expressive of our energy of kind of doing things that are very exciting and maybe destabilizing. We may see some changes that occur that are unexpected, and yet change seems to be easier now than it is at other times. And yet still the sun's half square to Saturn says even with this incredible reaching out of the box and this radical expression of energy, the sun still half square to Saturn is saying that it's still not enough to break free from the energy that exists. And that's actually corroborated by Mars having moved into Capricorn, making a sextile with Saturn, saying yes, in that containment of energy, that Mars making a sextile with Saturn holding the energy at the status quo might actually feel better than worse. We might actually not feel as restricted as we are maybe feeling like we can only do so much within whatever the structure is, and we're willing to accept that on some level. But it's an interesting mix of energy on the 9th where we're going to feel the desire to do something extraordinary and explosive and out of the box, and yet meet consequences and maybe even consider the consequences enough before we act that we might actually restrain our actions. It'll be interesting to see how January 9th plays out. On January 10th, the energy deepens a bit at Venus as Venus makes a half square to Pluto, and as we approach the new moon, which is exact on January 11th, the new moon occurs at 3:57 a.m. That's Pacific time in the United States. So you need to adjust your time zone accordingly. Just a few minutes before 4 a.m., so it's a few minutes before 7 a.m. in New York. And this new moon holds some real promise because, first of all, Venus is making a trine with Chiron. This trine has to do with how love can conquer even the destructive forces. Mars is moving into a trine with Jupiter that's not exact until tomorrow, January 12th. But we're going to talk about it now because it's all part of the new moon energy, because we have hope. We have the potential of how optimism and cooperation actually seem to kind of help make a pause in the complexity and the difficulty of energies. In some ways, I think the new moon on January 11th holds some real keys to the potential of what's ahead, but it doesn't itself change the deeper energy that we're still living within. This is a new moon in Capricorn, which means that we are focused on the practical, we're focused on the real world, we're focused on the energy that has to do with with getting to where we're going because we have a masterful plan and we figured out what we need to do in the outer world to reach the goal, to reach the top of the mountain even. And yet it's not being at the top of the mountain now. It's making the plan to get there. And I think that the one danger of the Mars trining Jupiter is that we can be over optimistic. We can think that things are better than they are, to the extent that we may not look at the details. We may just jump ahead and think that we have the solution. And it's really important to remind ourselves to take things slowly. And we're not going to get away with just kind of wishful thinking here, because the new moon, just hours after the new moon itself, the new moon will eventually, about 18 hours later, the new moon will actually catch up with Pluto and intensify and deepen the energy. And then it will be followed up by the sun day by day, moving inching closer to Pluto. And that's exact on the 20th. And we'll get there in a few minutes. But there's this deeper energy that we need to go through. It's almost like, even though we can have hope, we can have optimism, we can look for ways to cooperate at the new moon time on January 11th, it's like we still have to go through the rest of the hell realms. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, when in hell, keep marching. In other words, the way out is the way through. And we're not quite through it yet. And we might have this premature hope that, we're going to get there. We can see the way out, but we still need to go through the rest of the period of time. And I think that'll take through the 20th and then some for the sun to actually reach and, to line up with Pluto. And in the interim, by the 13th, we have, so Mars is still making that trine to Jupiter. That's exact on the 12th. And even on the 13th, it's there. But also on the 13th, later in the day, we see here at the noon chart that Mercury is still at 29 degrees, almost 30 degrees of Sagittarius, which would be 0 degrees of Capricorn. Mercury actually moves into Capricorn just before 7 p.m. Pacific time. And so that's going to weigh in again with more seriousness. It's almost like our hopes and dreams at the new moon might become rather quickly deflated, but this is not about giving up hope. This is about turning the illusion of our imagination and our vision into reality. And we might say we become disillusioned. But what that really means is that we can make our plans more real and kind of ground them so that on the 13th and 14th, even if we're facing some complexity and difficulty, we can at the same time also turn those plans into something more real and get substance. We may not be able to reach the summit of the mountain, but we can maybe set a secondary goal that's close to what the goal was that we wanted to reach. And even that in itself has some positive energy attached to it. So this is a very important new moon. It's the first new moon of 2024. And as such, it also is setting much of the tone, not just for the days or weeks ahead, but even for the year in general. By the time we get to the 15th, we actually come up to another change of energy. On the 15th, the sun, which is still moving, inching closer and closer to Pluto. It's almost like we can feel the heaviness, the darkness, the transformation. But the sun makes an exact the sun makes an exact sextile to Neptune, the planet of dreams and imagination. And this actually occurs at the same time that the moon is moving through Pisces, and the moon is lining up with Neptune, meaning that the moon in Pisces is making a sextile to the sun and then a sextile to Pluto, which intensifies and deepens the energy, but it also brings out into the world the potential for our dreams and imagination again. So there's a bit of a dance we're doing here between fantasy and reality, and we have to point out the fact that fantasy isn't just separation or denial from reality. Fantasy is the way in which we imagine the future that then we work with Saturn to make that future real. It's how dreams become real. Not that every dream becomes real, but I think that the 15th is a good example of the potential that we have, and yet we still need to be careful about overinflating our dreams, about making them seem like they're real, when in fact they're more like they're like the potential that we see that we then try to attain, we try to manifest in the three-dimensional world. And so that becomes part of the 15th. By the 15th, 16th, and 17th, we also have some agitation about how much is enough, how much change is enough change, or can there be change that's actually too much change? What does that look like? And by the 18th, we have Mercury moving through still early degrees of Capricorn. Mercury actually reaches an exact sextile to Saturn on its way, that would be exact very early in the morning on the 18th, so we'll feel it on the 17th and the 18th. And the Mercury sextile to Saturn is our thinking becomes rather grounded, rather restricted. It becomes based upon practicality. This is almost like recovering from the illusions and the fantasies and the hopes and the dreams that we've had. But on the 17th and 18th, our thoughts become more grounded. But what's intriguing about that is almost immediately as we pull our thoughts in and get them grounded, by the 19th early in the morning, which means we'll be feeling it on the 18th, then Mercury moves from its sextile to Sirius Saturn into a trine to optimistic Jupiter. So it's almost like we move from pessimism or realism to optimism and hope again. And so we have this dance that we've been doing this month that becomes back and forth between these two energies. And I think this becomes a large part of what sets the month of January kind of separate from where we've been in the past, because it's almost by being able to see both sides of the coin, by seeing how we want to grow, how we want to expand the potential, and then holding it in enough to make something real happen. That's that expansion contraction process that can be very healthy for growth. On the 19th, though, we also have Venus making an exact square with Neptune, which again brings the fantasy in. But here now, the fantasy is about Venus. It's about what we love. It's about the illusions that we create that are our dreams about perfection, our dreams about love, our romance. And we can take a situation that's rather difficult and complex and in our mind turn it into something that's very magical and very fantastical. And again, there's nothing unhealthy about this as long as we can remain aware of where that differs from the physical world and the restrictions of the real world in which we must exist. And that's through the 19th. And so as we approach now the 19th and 20th, the sun is still inching closer 1 degree day by day by day to Pluto, which is at the very last degree, almost the last minutes of Capricorn. Now, we need to say a few words about Pluto because in March of 2023, Pluto tipped into Aquarius, and we saw the beginnings of what will be almost a 20-year cycle or a 20-year phase. A 20-year phase as part of a 250-year cycle. And that 20-year phase of Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring us very quickly into the future. And what I mean by the future is I mean technology. When Pluto tipped into Aquarius back in March of 2023, almost overnight we were confronted with a new wave of artificial intelligence, AI, ChatGPT, robotics, augmented reality, all these things that were all of a sudden not just science fiction, but as I like to say, science faction. They had become real, and yet it's just the tip of the iceberg of where we're going. Well, Pluto then retrograded back into Capricorn, dealing with the very real deconstruction and reconstruction of the basic Capricornian things of our world: banking, government systems, the U.S. Constitution, foundations and fundamentals have all kind of been deconstructed, have gone through a death, and death is required in order to go through a rebirth. And as Pluto moves back into Aquarius, which it does on January 20th, literally moments after the sun lines up with Pluto at the very last degree, and even the very last minute at 29 degrees of Capricorn and 59 minutes at 5:45 a.m. on January 20th. That's, of course, Pacific time. At 29 degrees Capricorn and 59 minutes, that's 1/60th of a degree away from the sun moving into Capricorn. I'm sorry, for the sun moving out of Capricorn and into Aquarius at 6:07 a.m. And then Pluto moving out of Capricorn and into Aquarius at 4:56 p.m. on January 20th. And although we may not feel it instantaneously, this is a huge shift that's setting the seeds for what's going to take 18 to 20 years to unfold as Pluto continues its move through Aquarius, and the speed at which technology is impacting our lives, as crazy as this is going to sound, is going to speed up. The acceleration is going to feel like a rocket ship, and it may take a couple of months. And in fact, one of the background things that I'll talk about more in depth when I do my overview for 2024 is that Jupiter moving through Taurus, and Jupiter is the planet of expansion. It's the magnifying lens. It's the bigger, better, more planet. And in fact, we have Mercury now coming into its trine that is exact on the 19th. It's trine to Jupiter that follows the sextile to Saturn. And remember, the Saturn sextile is contraction, and then the Jupiter trine, or the Mercury trine to Jupiter, is expansion. And we're going to feel this Jupiter expansion in Taurus even more as Jupiter moves closer and closer to Uranus, and this will be exact in April. And I think that the technological breakthroughs, or the impact of the inventions that may occur at that point in time, are going to be astounding, even though maybe technology has been astounding for the past 30, 40 years or more, that this is going to be like being shot out of a rocket in some ways. And so we're going to see the acceleration of technology from Pluto moving into Aquarius, and then the modern planet associated with Aquarius, Uranus, being magnified as Jupiter approaches it through January, February, March, and then lines up exactly in April. And even on January 18th, Jupiter is being magnified by the moon moving through Taurus. And so on January 18th, we have a moon-Jupiter alignment and Mercury trining it. So our thoughts are going to become more philosophical, more big ideas. We're going to really be expanding what it is that we're thinking, and that we're actually moving into a larger sphere of thinking. But this can also be exaggeration. So we need to be careful about how far we're taking our thoughts, because again, what's set up on January 17th, 18th, and even on the 19th, as this romanticism and big ideas that are now kind of based upon idealism and what our sense of beauty is, by the 20th, some of those hopes will come crashing down as the sun lines up with Pluto, and we do this it's almost like the last dance that we do, that as we move through the hell realms, but we've already been there. And when I say the hell realms, I don't mean a place where we get punished. I mean the places of otherworldliness. This is not the Judeo-Christian, do bad shit and you end up, in eternal damnation. This is more the Buddhist concept, or the concept of the space in between here and there, the disincarnate consciousness, the unconsciousness. And in a way, we've been doing that work for years now, but this is almost like a last visit to that spot. And by the time we get to the end of January, I think that we're going to be moving into new realms. And again, it doesn't happen overnight. But the changes astrologically on January 18th, 19th, 20th, I think are very profound. And by the time we get to January 23rd, and now we have both Pluto and the Sun in Aquarius, and so we're getting this glimpse of the future and how fast the future seems to be approaching now. It is a definite break from the past. We've been, again, through September, October, November, December of 2023, although there's been a lot of events and a lot of noise and a lot of difficult stuff, fundamentally, there haven't been deep changes. And now I think we're reaching the point where those changes are beginning to occur quite rapidly and will continue through February, March, April, and on through 2024. Now, the odd thing, though, or the interesting thing is that by January 23rd, Venus, which has been moving through Sagittarius with our kind of our antenna of what we like, has been the present moment is difficult, but I like the thought of what can happen in the future. What happens is that Venus moves out of Sagittarius into Capricorn, and boom, this is another reinforcement, even though the Sun and Pluto have moved out of Capricorn and into futuristic Aquarius. There's something that's still anchoring us and still holding us on a personal level, on an interactive level, on an intellectual. Mercury is still in Capricorn level. On a physical level, Mars is still in Capricorn. And although it might be frustrating because things aren't moving quite as fast as we want them to, on another level, it feels safe because the familiar, what's that saying? You know, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And in some ways, we're comfortable with what's going on, but it also may feel frustrating because things aren't moving fast enough. And that frustration builds through January 25th, when Mars, moving through Capricorn, reaches a 90-degree angle with Chiron, the wounded healer. And remember, we opened the month with the Sun making a square to Chiron on January 6th. And some of that confrontation with old wounds and with complex inherited difficulties and hurts, whether they be cultural or racial or religious, need I say more, that some of those things which maybe popped, into the forefront back around January 4th, 5th, 6th, once again, when Mars makes its square to Chiron on January 25th, we're going to be back in those same issues again, and this may not be fun. Now, this is leading us right into the full moon, which is exact on the morning of January 25th. Now, Thursday morning, January 25th, and Pacific time, this is 9:53, which is just before 1 a.m. Eastern time in the United States, that this full moon in Leo is opposite the Sun in Aquarius. And so the full moon in Leo is about putting things on display. It's about holding intention and showing it to the world in some ways. And so I think that this is a very powerful full moon because in some ways it's the culmination of what began back at the new moon back on January 11th, when we had all this optimism and all this hope. Now at the full moon is 90 degrees. It's square to Jupiter. The Sun is square to Jupiter. The full moon axis is being agitated by Jupiter, almost as if there's too much of everything. And this too much, because Jupiter is the planet of bigger and better and more, but bigger and better and more can in fact be too much, because too much of a good thing, even something that is healthy, something in overdose of healthy, can be toxic. Hippocrates said that, even a tonic, something that is healing, in too much quantity, it can be toxic. And so we have that confrontation at this full moon of the full moon and the Sun at the moment of the full moon, both squaring Jupiter, the planet of bigger, better, more, and too much. And so it's almost like there's too much change. And this, I think, is going to be corroborated by the difficulty that we have with the Mars square Chiron that was exact, that is exact. Well, the Mars square Chiron was exact just prior to the full moon, early on January 25th. The full moon then occurs with that Mars square Chiron, but the day after the Mars square Chiron, Mercury coming right in behind Mars squares Chiron exactly early in the morning on the 26th. And so we're getting this thing of that our words that we want to use to heal are not healing. Things in some ways, it's almost like too much is making things worse. And at the same point in time, we have Uranus that's been retrograde for the past 4 months. Uranus now is stationary direct. It'll take a few days to have any movement at all, but when a planet is stationary, meaning that it looks like it's not moving forward or backward, when a planet is not moving or looks like it's not moving, what that means is that planet is holding more power. And so Uranus, the planet of sudden change, Uranus, the planet of upheaval, Uranus is actually holding on to its energy, and it's not moving very quickly, even though it's turning direct. It's ending its backward motion. We're going to see that change picking up extraordinarily through February, March, and April, but right now it feels like something is shifting. It feels like there's a change in the air, even though we don't yet know what it is or where it's going. So this is an important full moon. There's a lot of conflict and tension tied up in this full moon, but there's, again, the potential for what can happen or what will be happening around the nearest bend, around, over the days, weeks, and even the months ahead. And I don't think we're able to see that yet. But we might be over forceful in what we say because Mercury is inching closer and closer to its conjunction to Mars. Now remember, Mars squared Chiron, difficulty in healing. Mercury squared Chiron. These are both right at the time of the full moon. Mercury squared Chiron, our words might do more damage, even though we intend them to heal. They may stir things up. But Mercury is moving closer and closer to Mars, and that Mercury conjunct Mars is exact at about 7 a.m. on January 27th. And so we have the moon actually having moved into Virgo, out of Leo, where it was all about the show, it was all about what's being presented in the outer world. And now on January 27th, by midday, the moon moves out of Virgo, out of Leo, and into Virgo, where we become more analytical, more thoughtful, more careful. And that moon, as it moves into Virgo, is going to kind of feel a little bit out of whack, because there's the sense that our thoughts are not necessarily leading us in the direction that we feel like we want to go or need to go. And we're beginning to get some real conflict, not just from the sun still squaring Jupiter, the overdoing, the over-extravagant, the overindulgence, but this is a rather tricky few days around the 27th, and yet we also have some stability coming in from Venus on the 27th, making a sextile with Saturn. It's almost like during this period of time, we're beginning to get a sense that if we pull back on our hopes and desires and don't try to have some pie in the sky, amazing solution to everything all at once, we can actually make real progress, but we have to do it that's inch by inch, or maybe even millimeter by millimeter. It has to be little bits at a time as Venus makes a sextile to Saturn, and as Saturn is moving slowly towards, or Jupiter is actually moving towards its trine, not only to Venus, but also its sextile to Saturn, that this is a time when we're getting some real stability coming in, even though there's still a lot of noise, there's still a lot of conflict, there's something deeper that is setting the tone that allows change to happen in a way that's going to be profound. Because on the 27th, Mercury, which is now moving ahead of its moving ahead of its conjunction to Mars, Mercury is moving into an exact trine to Uranus. And that trine to Uranus, the Mercury trine to Uranus, is exact on the 28th. As the moon moving through Virgo is making trines to Mars and Mercury in Capricorn, and making a trine to Uranus, and Mercury and Mars are both making trines to Uranus on the 28th and 29th. And so we're seeing huge stability here, but because trines are stable, they're flowing. But the stability involves Uranus, which is the planet of instability. What the hell does that mean? It means that we can expect the unexpected. We can expect things to change dramatically and profoundly, but in a way that's ultimately going to stabilize things. And I know that sounds like a paradox. It sounds like a contradiction, and it is. But this contradiction is very profound, because in this contradiction we have the setting for the change that couldn't happen earlier, that's beginning to happen, and it's abrupt and powerful, and it feels destabilizing. And on the other hand, this destabilizing change is exactly what's needed to happen in order to make things stabilize. And I think that the end of January, we're reminded that even sudden change, even if it's in a direction that we think we want to go, that sudden change is not easy to integrate. And I think that the last days of January, as the moon moves out of Virgo and into Libra, and as those trines from Mercury and Mars kind of become exact, by the late on the 29th and even into early on the 30th. By the 30th and 31st, we're feeling the smoothness wane, and instead it's being replaced by the realization that we still don't know quite where we are. We still don't know how we're going to make all this work. In some ways, I think it will unfold in February. That will become more obvious. But I think that that January has a very optimistic near end, and then there's a little bit of a twist, and we may not feel quite as positive as we felt. But I think the important thing to understand in all of this is that as we move through the month of January, that things finally will feel like something is changing. Now, just a quick word about change in general. In a world where we are so bifurcated, I know I've said this before, but there are so many issues, whether they're personal issues, whether they're issues of how we live our lives, how we love, what we feel politically, what we feel about medical autonomy or medical or physical sovereignty, how we feel about government intervention that's based upon misogyny and or the idea that government should interfere, in women's decisions on her own bodily issues, and how we're bifurcated as a society where we have people that believe so strongly this way and that way, whether it's the issue of abortion or right to life, or versus abortion, whether it's issues on medical autonomy, vaccine issues, whether it's issues on fundamental national issues of rights of individuals to hold their land as sovereign versus issues of national interest, whether it be, Palestine, Israel, or Ukraine, Russia, or even for that matter, indigenous cultures in the United States, First Nation cultures in Canada and the United States, and the governments here. I mean, all around the world, these issues create these bifurcations, these different ways of looking at reality. And the thing to understand is that as change occurs on each and every separate issue, although there's larger global issues, that when change occurs and things settle, some people are going to be very pleased and other people are not. And that's just what part of change is about. And yet I think that what we're going to see through 2024, 25, 26, 27, 28 is, I think that there are going to be these larger issues that are going to settle in a way that on half the issues, half the people may be satisfied, and on half the issue, half the people may be very dissatisfied. No one is going to get their way on every issue, but I still think that we're going to see a settling of a lot of the conflict that maybe began in the mid-1960s, early 70s, came back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and then came back again very strong in the 2010s, even through the early 2020s. And I think we're going to see a lot of these issues settling. But it's felt for years now that so many issues are just impossible to settle. And so many things have come back up that we believed were settled that all of a sudden became totally unsettled again. And I do think that as we move through January, we're going to get a sense that some of the stagnation that it's felt like we've been stuck in for these past years, and certainly for the past months, may begin to have some changes that are going to make some people happy and some people unhappy. And what it seems to be may not be what it ultimately is, but there's going to be movement. So in closing, what I want to say is, as we move through January, hold on to your hats, because the winds of change will be blowing and will be blowing strong. And it's just a taste of what's to come. And we'll have more later on in the month as I look at the year overview of the year ahead. And then, of course, throughout 2024. And thank you all for tuning into this. And thank you for kind of going with the flow, as there have been interferences of birds and monkeys and people walking by and whatever. And as I do next month, I will be back in my home office in Seattle. I look forward to seeing many of you who live in the Los Angeles or Southern California area at the Conscious Life Expo at the LAX Hilton the second weekend in February. I will be there I'll be on a number of panels and giving a few talks and doing a post-conference workshop. And for now, that's it. I'm Rick Levine, wishing you all the best possible year of 2024. And again, as I always say, it's very important to push our thinking out, to think as cosmically as we possibly can. But thinking cosmically is absolutely useless unless we act locally. More so now than ever, we need to put out the brush fires in our own individual and personal lives. That's the only way the larger forest fires of social upheaval will be solved. Think cosmically, act locally. Best of 2024 to all of you. And this is Rick Levine saying goodbye to 2023 and hello to 2024.